Good afternoon, everybody. I'm Reid. I'm one of the directors at CyNam, and I moonlight as an Aegis professor at University of Bristol. I was thinking about hardware security and hardware and microprocessors. I was just saying to someone earlier, the last time I actually did that was in my undergrad over 30 years ago. So be gentle with me. Today, really, I guess I'm speaking because of my expertise in innovation ecosystems. So I wanted to give you just maybe a few pointers of what might be interesting and useful and get you thinking about what we might do together for Cherry and the wider hardware by design. So let's see if I can get the clicker to work. Right. Yes. First question is, what animal would you like to be in another life? Have you ever wanted to be a particular type of animal? A bear. A bear. So we've got a bear. A
cat.
Dolphin, cat. T-Rex. Well, I'll let you know what animal I want to be. I want to be a Eurasian beaver. Yes, yeah, exactly, yeah. Actually, I'd like to be a Scottish beaver because they're awesome. They're awesome creatures, and they've got a lot going for them. Sadly, they were extinct in the UK, and where I'm from in Scotland. 400 years ago, we didn't have any beavers at all. They'd all gone, and they'd been hunted. There'd been deforestation, introduction of monocultural farming, urban expansion, and yeah, apparently they were quite tasty in pies and fur, and also something called castoreum, not to be confused with castor oil. I'm not really going to go into any detail about where they got the castoreum, but it was a precious commodity that even in the Middle Ages was resulted in hunting of beavers to the point where they were almost at extinction. Thankfully, in recent years, we've seen the reintroduction of the European beaver into our ecosystems, and including here in the UK, and it's been an absolute amazing story. I was watching a program just the other night on Wild Scotland, talking about the role of beavers in ecosystems. And when we talk about ecosystems, we often forget actually where it came from. There are lots of natural ecosystems. We can think of forests, we can think of grasslands and mountains and deserts and rivers and so on. And that's really at the heart of what an ecosystem is. And when we start talking about innovation and technology ecosystems, we've really got to have a health warning. People use the language quite a lot, but they don't often define what they mean. So the next time you hear somebody talk about an innovation ecosystem, you might want to ask them politely, what do you actually mean by that? Now, in terms of the history and the practice, it's something I've actually studied. I'll save you the details. But really, an ecosystem is a system. As an engineer, I think in systems. And innovation policy back in the 1960s really started to get into the notion of innovation as a system. Innovation had been defined as lots of different things. And of course, with governments, you get different policy moves over different years. And systems became a big thing in the 60s. And then in the 90s, the term ecosystem started to become attached to innovation and technology. In fact, it was a Harvard Business Review by Ron Adner. There are lots of definitions for what that means, but essentially it's a system that involves lots of different components. You can see on the right-hand side, this is extracted that from a research article looking at different types of innovation ecosystems. There are lots of different things that you need in an ecosystem and different ways to define it. I mean, in terms of, why do you want an ecosystem? Well, I mean, innovation ecosystems for here is really about delivering some value. And I guess when we're thinking about Cherry, which we'll come on to in a bit, what do we actually want the ecosystem to do for Cherry and for security by design? So have that in your mind. But measuring the value of ecosystems, there are lots of approaches. There are ways of diagnosing the ecosystems in terms of having toolkits, looking at entrepreneurs, looking at different assets. So there's tons of research in this space. I recommend that you ignore most of it because unless you're really interested in working in ecosystems per se. So for me, one model I like is the one from the Startup Community Way. In fact, a colleague of mine, Richard, actually did this slide when we were looking just at Cheltenham and thinking about the cybersecurity innovation ecosystem that we've been building here. So it's a little bit out of date now, but the idea is that you have a bunch of different things that are relevant. You have intellectual capital. We've got a lot of intellectual capital in the room today and representing that. And more generally, people, having the right people working together and lots of different types of people as well. We've talked about money. There are lots of different types of money that we need. Grants can be good, but actually investment can also be good and getting revenue. And working out what types of money we might need when we think about Cherry. Physical capital. So this building is part of a physical capital, but what about labs? What about other aspects of geography? You hear terms like clusters and science parks and so on. Those are all great, but actually, how are we using them and how is that relevant for things like Cherry? And then the institutional capital. So having Paul from the NCIC open things up. Paul was a great speaker and he's got a great story, but part of his value today is that he's representing government. So having those institutions present and being part of that ecosystem, they can bring something quite special. So locally here, we've got the likes of GCHQ and NCSC and a variety of other players that makes this particular locality quite special, even if it's not that obvious. And at the heart of this capitals approach is the entrepreneur. And we haven't really talked about entrepreneurs today yet. But I think that the role is important. When we then think about what's the scale of the ecosystem for Cherry and for security by design, well, it's global, isn't it? And there are lots of different actors and types of organizations that we will need to be involved with. So there are the innovators and the entrepreneurs. There's your professional services. I was chatting to somebody earlier about how some of the consultancies play into this. What is the consultancy's view, the management consultancy's view of security by design? How much do they have an impact on government policy? That's the thing. Investors, where are the investors in the room? How many investors know about Cherry and security by design? I'm asking these questions, not that I know the answer, but I'm just curious about what we might have done in terms of these different actors. We talked about government. What about education? How do we teach security by design, and at what levels? We were talking about apprentices earlier. Do any apprentices know that this exists? Do they know that we've got an unsolved problem from the 1970s? That, for me, is quite shocking, but also inspiring, because if we can fix this, what a great story. So where are the storytellers? We talked about large tech companies. We have one or two in the room. And what are their views on this? And then there's the wider industrial systems. We've got the entertainment industry. I'm not really sure what Hollywood would think about this and whether there will ever be a movie about Cherry and security by design, but who knows? Maybe a documentary. And it goes on. So there are lots of ways to look at the ecosystem. But at the heart of it, I'm back to my beavers again, it turns out beavers are amazing ecosystem engineers in the real world. They build dams, they chop down trees, but they do it with a purpose to make their world a better place. And in fact, let me just see if we can go back. And we'll come back to that in a minute. We'll come back to the value that they provide. But one of the things that we maybe haven't touched on yet is the power of the social network. And I'm not talking about the online social network. I'm talking about the power of people. So having this group of people here today, this has never been done before. You have not all been together. A number of you already know each other, but there are lots of people here who don't know everybody else. Even today, I was asked to connect two people together who don't know each other, but actually there's potential value there. And so I'm acting as a bridge. And one of the pieces of research, a good friend and colleague of mine, Toby Stone, wasn't able to come today, he actually was fascinated about how networks of people work in innovation, so much so that he did a PhD on it and worked out about weak tie network architectures. So there is some theory and practice around how to build out these networks. A lot of us do it by instinct, but how can we use this type of network approach for Cherry and for security by design? I talked about entrepreneurs. So an entrepreneur is not just about somebody who wants to make money or a tech bro from Silicon Valley. Actually, we're talking about somebody who has a curiosity and a willingness to experiment, somebody who is adaptable, somebody who has a risk tolerance and is comfortable with failure. If you're a scientist in the room, you are comfortable with failure because, that's part of the scientific method, right? Where are the entrepreneurs for Cherry? Some of them might be in this room, but I'm sure there are lots of other entrepreneurs around that have that long-term focus, have that persistence and the innovative thinking. And it's not about individuals, it's about teams. So it's a team sport, innovation. You might have an assumption about what good innovation and entrepreneurship means. Well, and that can be about building a product company, but actually there are lots of ways of doing innovation and lots of types of innovation that I think we're going to need for Cherry and security by design. And these are just some of the types of innovation that might be necessary. Innovating in process, innovating in structure. I talked about network. Innovating in services, innovating in brand, in customer engagement. So there are lots of ways to do innovation, as well as building a new product company based on some hardware, which I'm guessing that's part of the plan. One thing that I think I've also been reflecting on just in the last few days thinking about this is the role of open source software and hardware versus for-profit technology. A number of you might have read The Cathedral and the Bazaar. There are lots of models for how open source software and hardware works, but mainly software, that you have a top-down approach and a bottom-up approach. If you look at the history of things like Linux, it's a fascinating story. You might think, well, how did that actually happen? Why would people give away software for free? And free as in speech, not as in beer. So thinking about markets and market opportunities, I didn't read the whole of this Cherry Adoption and Diffusion Research report, but it's an excellent report. If you haven't read it, you can get it on the internet, released in April 2024. And just looking at some of the potential markets for Cherry adoption. So, and I don't know what the criteria was to decide on the sort of red, amber, green, but IoT embedded system seems to be the place really to focus in terms of economics of adoption, and then telecoms, defense, automotive, and mobile devices, that looks like the hardest. We'll see. But maybe for you, thinking about being curious about what markets you know that you think might be worth investigating, and then thinking about what are those barriers, but what are the enablers, where to get the money, where to get the traction, how to tell the story to get people emotionally engaged. I mean, I found that actually only in the last few days, having really got into some of the detail, the penny really dropped for me in a way that it probably hadn't before. And it goes back to that 1972 picture. You know, what a great story. And wouldn't it be amazing if we can do this? So some of this is about emotional buy-in as well as getting in a hard business, getting in the numbers and so on. So where are we with Cherry? We've come a long way, but there's a long way to go. And just thinking about what are the approaches for scaling. This is a Simon Wardley special on pioneers, settlers, and town planners. The idea, you know, if you're going into a new place, you need the pioneers who are willing to take the risks and get in there on their own. And then when they've established themselves, you have some settlers that will start to grow things at a bigger level. And then finally, you get your town planners who can scale it. Maybe we've got a number of pioneers and settlers here today. I don't really know where we are with Cherry, but as a model, it's quite interesting to think through, you know, what is my role here? And, you know, where do we need to go to next in terms of that sort of evolution? Without saying that you're here in Cheltenham, I thought I should tell you a little bit about what we're doing. So we've got CyNam, been going for, it'll be 10 years next year. Started as a small group, and it's a community interest company, and it's really been gathering the ecosystem in this region for quite a number of years. And it's been a real pleasure and privilege to be part of that. I think CyNam would love to be involved in the journey with Cherry going forward. In terms of our ecosystem, we've got quite a few thousand individuals involved, a number of businesses, we've got government, industry, academia, festivals. So there's a whole of community approach, a lot of goodwill. So as one place to really drive Cherry, this is a place I think we can help. It's not the only place, and we work with more widely. There's the Golden Valley development, which will be hopefully coming online in a couple of years next to GCHQ, which is a place to scale. There's opportunities to put labs and other things in there, if that might be something for Cherry. And then in terms of nationally, we have all the cyber clusters, and we've got a whole ton of innovation assets all over the country, in different sectors. You know, what is the national sectoral strategy for Cherry? I don't know. I'm sure you've got a better idea for that. And then internationally, you know, how does this fit in with the global semiconductor ecosystem? And I don't know how many of you have read Chip War or Goodbye Globalization. Those were sort of two books that just came to mind when I was thinking about what might be happening in the coming years and how the sort of global economic and political factors might affect what we do with Cherry. And I don't know what the answer is. So really to leave you at the end, what role will you play in building this innovation ecosystem? Is this the question I'd like to leave you with. And to wrap it up, let's get back to some animals. Bottlenose dolphins. Do you know why they make good ecosystem builders? Absolutely. They create social clusters. So this is some research done in Australia looking at kinship groups. And you can see how the bridging across these close-knit communities. For Cherry to succeed, we're going to have to bridge across different communities. And we need those bridge builders. Thank you very much.